I still remember the exact second my life split into two parts. The part before I knew the truth, and the part after I chose silence over rage. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, no moment where I confronted anyone or demanded answers. Just me, standing still in my own hallway, watching my entire life quietly fall apart. My wife was laughing. It was a soft laugh. Familiar. Comfortable. The kind of laugh I had trusted for more than 3 decades. And the man standing far too close to her was my son-in-law. They didn't notice me. They didn't hear the door. They didn't sense that everything was about to change. And in that moment, instead of anger, something colder settled inside me. I decided to pretend I knew nothing. My name is Michael Harris. And if you've ever been betrayed by the people you loved the most, the people you sacrificed for, the people you trusted inside your own home, then stay with me until the end of this story. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe to this channel. And tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching from? If betrayal has ever touched your family, you're not alone. Share your story. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. I had been married to Susan for 35 years. 35 years of building a life brick by brick. Morning routines. Shared bills. Quiet dinners. Arguments that faded into silence instead of resolution. We weren't a perfect couple. But I believed in loyalty. I believed that marriage meant choosing each other even when life stopped being exciting. I believed my home was safe. Susan and I had one daughter, Rachel. She was our entire world. Every long shift I worked. Every opportunity one passed up. Every compromise I made, it was all for her. When Rachel married Daniel, I thought she had found a good man. He was polite. Well-spoken. Always respectful in front of me. At first, he called me Sir. Later, he started calling me Dad. I helped him get his first stable job. I co-signed a loan when they needed help. I defended him when Susan said he was too ambitious, too charming, too calculated. I treated him like the son I never had. Looking back now, I realize he was studying me the entire time. Learning my habits. My schedule. My blind spots. That day, everything changed because of something small. My doctor canceled an appointment last minute. I didn't bother telling Susan I was coming home early. Why would I? There had never been secrets in my house before. I unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. Too quietly. I heard Susan's laugh before I saw anything. It wasn't loud or playful. It was low. Intimate. Careless. My body froze before my mind could react. I stood just outside the living room, hidden by the corner of the wall, listening. Then I saw them. Susan stood close to Daniel. Too close. His hand rested on her waist like it belonged there. Her fingers brushed against his arm, slow and familiar. No words were needed. The truth was already screaming. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Time stretched in a way I didn't know was possible. Every breath felt deliberate. Every second burned itself into my memory. And still, I didn't move. I stepped back. I walked out of my own house without making a sound. I sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how 35 years could collapse into one silent moment. That night, Susan acted normal. She asked about my day. She served dinner. She talked about errands and bills and weekend plans. I watched her like a stranger. Daniel didn't come over for a while after that. Then, one evening, Susan sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands were folded. Her expression calm. She said she was unhappy. That she had been unhappy for a long time. She said she needed to find herself. That we had grown apart. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I told her I understood. A week later, we sat together in a quiet office to sign the divorce papers. Susan looked relieved. Almost peaceful. The lawyer explained the documents slowly, carefully. Susan nodded. I nodded. My pen hovered over the paper. And as I signed my name, I realized something important. They thought I was broken. They thought I was clueless. They believed silence meant defeat. What they didn't know was that silence had given me time. Time to observe. Time to think. Time to plan. Because when a man loses everything he thought he had, he stops being afraid of what comes next. And I was just getting started. The week after the divorce papers were signed felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Just empty. Susan moved out without drama. No tears. No apologies. She packed her things with a calm efficiency that hurt more than anger ever could. Every drawer she emptied felt like a memory being erased. I helped her carry the last box to the car. That was the moment I realized something else had changed. She didn't look guilty. She looked free. I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away, knowing my life had officially entered a phase where nothing familiar could be trusted anymore. Rachel didn't speak to me much during that time. She said she needed space. Said the divorce was hard on everyone. Daniel stayed invisible. No calls. No visits. Which told me everything I needed to know. People who think they've won always disappear for a while. They assume the damage is done. They assume the story is over. I went back to my routines on purpose. Same coffee shop. Same walking route in the mornings. Same grocery store. I wanted Susan and Daniel to believe I was exactly what I looked like, a man quietly accepting his loss. But silence has a way of sharpening the mind. I started noticing details I'd ignored for years. Bank statements. Small transfers. Joint accounts Susan had always insisted on managing. I wasn't snooping. I was verifying. And what I found confirmed what my instincts already knew. There were withdrawals I couldn't explain. Payments to accounts I didn't recognize. Nothing large enough to raise alarms. Just careful enough to stay unnoticed. Daniel was smart. He didn't rush. I remembered how eager he'd been to learn about my investments years ago. How curious he'd been about my retirement plans. At the time, I'd been proud. Now I felt stupid. I didn't confront anyone. I hired a forensic accountant instead. A quiet man in his late 50s who asked very few questions and listened far more than he spoke. He didn't react when I told him I suspected my own family. He simply nodded. 2 weeks later, he confirmed it. Money had been moving for over a year. Slowly. Carefully. Daniel hadn't stolen. He'd repositioned. Accounts had been redirected. Beneficiaries changed. Susan's signature was on everything. Legally. Deliberately. I thanked the accountant and paid him in cash. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I was relieved, but because the picture was finally clear. I knew exactly who I was dealing with. Rachel called me the next afternoon. She said she wanted to talk. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. She looked tired. Thinner. I felt something twist in my chest. She was still my daughter. No matter what had happened, that truth didn't disappear. She asked how I was holding up. I told her I was managing. She hesitated before speaking again. Then she said something that told me Daniel had already started preparing his version of the story. She said he felt uncomfortable around me. Said he worried I blamed him for the divorce. I smiled gently and told her she had nothing to worry about. I told her I wanted her to be happy. That seemed to relax her. People are easier to manipulate when they think you've surrendered. Before we left, I said something else. I told her I was thinking about selling the house. I said it was too big for me now. Her eyes widened slightly. Daniel had always liked that house. That told me more than her words ever could. Over the next month, I made sure my decisions stayed visible. I spoke openly about downsizing. About simplifying my life. I let it slip that my investments hadn't performed well recently. I complained casually about rising costs and shrinking savings. Not lies. Just incomplete truths. Daniel reappeared soon after. He called me one evening and asked if we could talk. I said yes. He came over like nothing had ever happened. Same confident smile. Same firm handshake. He asked how I was adjusting. I told him it was difficult but manageable. I thanked him for supporting Rachel through the divorce. I watched his shoulders relax. He thought the danger had passed. Before he left, I said something else. I mentioned that I was updating my will. Just casually. I said I wanted to make sure everything was fair. His eyes lingered on me a second too long. That night, I reviewed everything again. Accounts. Policies. Property titles. Then I started changing things. Quietly. Legally. I moved assets into protected structures Susan had never known about. I removed beneficiaries. I documented timelines. I prepared. Because revenge isn't loud. It's patient. Rachel invited me to dinner a few weeks later. Daniel was there. Susan wasn't. The house felt staged. Too clean. Too polite. Daniel talked about work. Rachel talked about plans. I smiled and nodded and played my part. At one point, Daniel excused himself to take a call. Rachel leaned toward me. She said something that cut deeper than I expected. She said she wished I had fought harder for the marriage. I looked at her and realized something painful. She didn't know the truth. Not yet. And I wasn't ready to give it to her. Some truths destroy more than they heal. I told her I loved her. That seemed enough. For now. When I left, Daniel walked me to the door. He thanked me for coming. He thanked me for being understanding. And I realized how badly he misjudged me. Men like Daniel mistake calm for weakness. They confuse silence with surrender. They forget one important thing. A man who has already lost everything has nothing left to fear. And I was closer than ever to making sure they learned that lesson the hard way. By the time autumn arrived, I had perfected my new role. The quiet man. The cooperative ex-husband. The harmless father-in-law who smiled politely and asked nothing. People underestimate consistency. They see the same calm behavior repeated over time and assume it's genuine. They stop watching closely. That's when mistakes happen. Daniel had started getting comfortable again. He called more often. Stopped by unannounced. Asked casual questions about my plans. Always framed as concern. I answered carefully. I spoke about health issues. About feeling tired. About wanting fewer responsibilities. I let him believe time was catching up to me. In reality, I was tracking everything. The forensic accountant had introduced me to a private investigator, someone who specialized in quiet truths. No confrontations. No drama. Just facts. I hired him under a different name. The first report came back within weeks. Daniel had been seeing Susan regularly. Not discreetly. They met during work hours. At hotels near the business district. At restaurants where nobody looked twice. Susan wasn't being careful anymore. Why would she? She thought the past was buried. The investigator also found something else. Daniel had been moving money again. Not from me. From Rachel. Small amounts at first. Framed as shared expenses. But the pattern was familiar. I felt a surge of anger for the first time since everything began. Not for myself. For my daughter. I didn't act on it. Anger clouds judgment. I waited. Rachel invited me to lunch one afternoon. Just the two of us. She looked uneasy. She asked if I was really okay. I told her the truth, a version of it. I said the divorce had been painful, but it had also forced me to see things clearly. I told her I wanted peace. That seemed to reassure her. Then she asked something unexpected. She asked if I trusted Daniel. I paused. Not too long. Just enough. I told her trust was complicated. That relationships change. That people revealed different sides over time. She nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on her coffee cup. Seeds don't need force. They just need the right moment. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to a business event. Said he wanted my advice. Said he respected my experience. I almost laughed. But I agreed. The event was crowded. Loud. Full of men who measured themselves by titles and watches. Daniel introduced me as his mentor. His voice carried pride. I played along. I spoke confidently. Shared harmless stories. I watched how he watched me. He was still evaluating risk. I needed him relaxed. Toward the end of the night, I let something slip. I mentioned that my old business contacts had reached out recently. That someone had offered me a consulting role. Nothing permanent. Just advisory. Daniel's interest sharpened immediately. Opportunities attract people like him. A week later, he asked if I'd consider investing with him. A small venture. I asked for details. He was prepared. Too prepared. That told me everything. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called my lawyer. We structured a proposal that looked tempting but harmless. No real exposure. Full documentation. Daniel accepted eagerly. I signed. On paper. Behind the scenes, everything was protected. Rachel called me that night, excited. She said Daniel was thrilled I was back in the game. I told her I was happy for them. Inside, I felt nothing. Just focus. Susan called me for the first time since the divorce 2 days later. Her voice was cautious. Almost polite. She said she'd heard I was doing well. I told her I was. She said she wanted to talk. I said no. Silence speaks louder than arguments. The investigator's next report confirmed what I suspected. Susan had quit her job. Daniel was supporting her financially. Not openly. But regularly. He was confident. Overextended confidence is dangerous. I began preparing the final pieces. Documentation. Timelines. Legal leverage. I made copies. I backed everything up. Then I waited for the right pressure point. It came sooner than expected. Rachel showed up at my door late one evening. She was crying. She said Daniel had been secretive. Defensive. She said money was missing. Not enough to panic. Enough to feel wrong. I invited her inside. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I simply listened. Then I told her something true. I told her I'd made mistakes trusting people too easily. I told her I'd learned the value of asking questions. She stayed quiet. Before she left, I gave her one piece of advice. I told her to start keeping records. Just in case. Daniel didn't know that conversation had happened. But he sensed something shift. He became attentive. Overly attentive. He started checking in more. Offering help. That only confirmed how close he was to the edge. The investigator delivered the final report a week later. Everything I needed was there. Financial misuse. Affairs. False representations. Nothing illegal enough to destroy him instantly. Enough to control the narrative. Enough to protect my daughter. Enough to make him understand who had been silent, and who had been watching. I looked at the files spread across my desk and felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Clarity. Revenge isn't about punishment. It's about balance. Daniel had believed he was invisible. Susan had believed she was untouchable. They were wrong. And the moment they realized it was coming fast. Because the quiet man they had dismissed was finally ready to speak. The first move wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. People expect revenge to look emotional. They expect shouting, exposure, confrontation. That expectation is a weakness. I started by meeting my lawyer again. Not to attack. To protect. We reviewed everything the investigator had gathered. Every transaction. Every timeline. Every inconsistency. My lawyer didn't smile. He didn't need to. He told me something simple. He said I wasn't dealing with criminals. I was dealing with people who relied on trust and perception. and perception can be redirected. The next step involved patience. I waited until Daniel felt secure. That didn't take long. His new venture, the one he believed I had quietly backed, had started gaining attention. Nothing major. Just enough to inflate his confidence. He started talking bigger. Spending more freely. Susan appeared beside him more openly now. They weren't hiding anymore. Rachel noticed. She didn't say anything at first. But distance began to grow between her and Daniel. Distance creates space. And space allows truth to breathe. I invited Rachel to dinner one evening. Just the two of us. I cooked her favorite meal. The one I used to make when she was younger. We talked about neutral things at first. Work. Plans. Life. Then she asked me something quietly. She asked if I thought people ever truly knew their partners. I didn't answer immediately. Silence has weight when you let it settle. I told her people often see what they want to see, until reality forces a correction. She nodded. Then she said Daniel had been pressuring her. About money. About trust. About loyalty. She said he made her feel guilty for questioning him. That was the moment. I didn't accuse him. I didn't mention Susan. I simply slid a folder across the table. Not everything. Just enough. Bank statements. Timelines. Her hands trembled as she read. She looked up at me with confusion, then disbelief. I told her one thing. I told her I hadn't wanted to destroy anyone. I had wanted to understand. Understanding had come at a cost. Rachel cried quietly. I let her. Pain needs room. When she left that night, she wasn't angry. She was awake. Daniel sensed the shift immediately. He called me the next morning. Asked if everything was okay. His voice was cautious now. I told him everything was fine. I told him I trusted him. Trust is a powerful lie. A week later, I made the next move. I contacted the partners involved in Daniel's venture. Not with accusations. With questions. Polite. Professional. I asked for clarity on structures I had invested in. I requested documentation. Transparency makes nervous people sloppy. Inconsistencies surfaced quickly. Nothing illegal. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Daniel panicked. He came to my house unannounced for the first time in months. He looked tired. Pressed. He asked if something was wrong. I told him the truth. I said I was reviewing my finances carefully now. That I'd learned the importance of awareness. I watched his confidence crack. Susan called me that night. Angry. Accusing. She said I was trying to ruin their lives. I didn't argue. I told her something she hadn't expected. I told her I didn't want her. I didn't want Daniel. I wanted peace. But peace requires honesty. She hung up without another word. Rachel moved out 2 weeks later. Quietly. Daniel tried to spin it as temporary. She didn't correct him. That silence did more damage than any argument could have. The final preparation took longer. I waited until Daniel made his biggest mistake. He leveraged credibility that wasn't his. Mine. That gave me legal leverage. Not revenge. Resolution. The meeting was calm. Lawyers present. Documents on the table. No shouting. No accusations. Just facts. Daniel realized too late that every path forward led to exposure. Not public. Personal. Professional. He settled. Quickly. The venture dissolved. Susan disappeared from his life soon after. Rachel came to see me one evening. She thanked me. Not for revenge. For restraint. She said she finally understood something important. That strength doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like patience. I sat alone that night, thinking about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd kept. Dignity. Clarity. My daughter's trust. The story wasn't over yet. But it no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. The quiet that followed felt different. Not empty. Not heavy. Just honest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting to anyone else's choices. I was living with my own. Rachel stayed with me for a few weeks after everything settled. We didn't talk much about Daniel. We didn't need to. Pain doesn't disappear when you name it. It fades when it's no longer controlling you. One evening, she asked me something simple. She asked how I knew when to stop. I thought about it for a moment. Then I told her the truth. I told her revenge only feels powerful when it's loud. But loud things burn fast. Control lasts longer. She nodded. That was enough. Susan never tried to contact me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that things hadn't worked out the way she'd imagined. That Daniel hadn't been as loyal as she believed. I felt nothing when I heard that. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just distance. People assume forgiveness means reconciliation. It doesn't. Forgiveness is choosing not to carry someone else's weight anymore. I sold the house a few months later. Not because it was painful, but because it belonged to a chapter that had closed. I moved into a smaller place near the park. Mornings became slower. Coffee tasted better when it wasn't rushed. Silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. Sometimes I'd sit on a bench and watch people pass by. Young couples arguing about nothing. Older couples walking quietly, side by side. I wondered how many of them believed betrayal couldn't happen to them. I hoped they were right. Rachel rebuilt her life carefully. She didn't rush into anything new. She learned to ask questions. To trust patterns, not promises. Our relationship grew stronger than it had been in years. Not because of shared pain, but because of shared honesty. One afternoon, she told me she was proud of me. Not for winning. For not becoming bitter. That mattered more than she knew. I went back to consulting occasionally. Not for money. For purpose. Experience has value when it's offered without ego. I helped a few people avoid mistakes I'd made myself. That felt like balance. Every now and then, someone would ask me how I stayed so calm through everything. I never gave the same answer twice. Because the truth is simple and complicated at the same time. When you lose the illusion of control, you gain clarity. I learned that love doesn't make people loyal. Character does. I learned that silence can be armor, if you wear it intentionally. And I learned that the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's moving forward without needing to look back. I don't hate Susan. I don't hate Daniel. Hate ties you to people longer than love ever could. They're just chapters now. And chapters don't get to decide how the story ends. If you're listening to this and you've been betrayed, if someone you trusted shattered the world you built, remember this. You don't need to scream to be strong. You don't need to rush to be powerful. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is stay calm long enough to see clearly. My name is Michael Harris. I'm 63 years old. And this is the story of how I lost a marriage, but found something far more important: myself.